Well, today, as I say, we're talking about love, and what an important subject that is. Something that every one of us needs, and every one of us thrives on being able to receive it. You know, I was reading about this guy who was a construction worker. And while he was on the construction site, he was using a nail gun, and he accidentally shot a nail into his left hand. Now, the hospital was right across the road from the construction site, so he was able to go over there and to walk into the foyer area. Now, let me tell you what happened with him when he went into the foyer. When he went into the foyer, he saw there was a simple room there. There was one chair there, there was a table there was a plant over in the corner, and there were two doors. And one of those doors was marked emergency. The other one was marked non-emergency. Well, he looked at his hand and thought to himself, you know, this really isn't an emergency. So he went through the non-emergency door. And he went through that non-emergency door. He found himself in another simple room. And in this simple room, there was a chair, there was a table, there was a plant over in the corner, and there were two other doors that were in there, and those two doors were marked internal and external. He looked at his hand and said, well, this certainly isn't internal. So he went through the external door. And when he walked through the external door, he found himself in a simple room. And you probably know what was already in that simple room, right? There was a chair there was a table there was a plant over in the corner, and there were two more doors. And one of those doors was marked severe pain. The other one was marked mild pain. Well, he was certainly in pain, but he didn't feel like it was severe, so he went through the mild pain door. He walked into yet another simple room. And in this simple room was a chair, there was a table, there was a plant in the corner, and there were two more doors in there, and those two doors were marked cash and credit. Well, he wasn't carrying cash with him on the construction site, so he said, I'm going to have to use a credit card. So he went through the credit door, and he found himself outside the hospital. He was kind of disillusioned. He went back to the construction site, and one of his co-workers said to him, did they help you? They fixed you already? That's amazing. He said, no, they didn't help me at all, but that's the most organized hospital I've ever seen. You know, sometimes we can be so organized, so regimented, that there are times that we can miss what is most important. We can sometimes get our priorities out of whack, can't we? We can get things kind of turned upside down, and we can really miss what's most important. And if you read through the Bible, you find that in God's eyes, the most important thing is our relationship with Him and our relationship with other people. And there was one word that marked all of those. It was that word, love. He told us that we're to love Him with all of our heart and soul and mind and strength, and He told us that we're to love other people as we love ourselves. Those are called the two greatest commandments. Isn't that interesting? We know about the 10 commandments, don't we? We know about all of those, but oftentimes we don't always think that the two greatest commandments are up there with the 10 commandments, but they just kind of cover all the 10 commandments. You love God in those first few, you love your neighbors, you love yourself in the last several of the 10 commandments. So those are the commandments that are most important, and the abiding word in there, the underlying word in there, the glue in all that, the bottom line in all that is the word love. Now, chances are if you belong to a life group, you got started in that life group maybe out of curiosity, or maybe you felt like, hey, they're studying a topic I'd like to know about. But once you got started in that, what kept you in that life group was because you felt accepted. You felt loved. You felt like you belonged in that group. And so no matter what the topic has been, no matter what the study has been, you feel like you fit in there, that you are loved there. You and I know that the feeling of being on the outside looking in is certainly no fun. If we have no one to connect with, we feel like that we aren't accepted, we aren't loved, then that's a bad feeling. But if we do have that sense of acceptance, that sense of love, you know how that feels, don't you? You say, I want to be a part of a group that loves me. When you love, you feel better. You feel like you matter. You feel like the pieces of your life are fitting together. And love is a gift from God. It is a characteristic of God. In fact, in 1 John chapter 4, John writes, God is love. Isn't that great? He doesn't say love is God. He says God is love. That is a characteristic of God. I would like for all of us to say that together. It's 3 simple words. God is love. Let's say it together. God is love. Great job. Let's do it one more time. God is love. Exactly. That's exactly right. That was said with a lot of conviction. That's great. There is no greater way for us to be pleasing to God than to love him with all of who we are and to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. That's 2 key ways of doing that. Very important. Jesus said, a new commandment I give you. That's not just a suggestion. He says, a new commandment I give you. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. All men will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Isn't it something that oftentimes churches are known for what they're against instead of what they are for? But if we really love people, people are going to respond to that, aren't they? People are going to say, wow, that's fantastic. You know, it was interesting when Sherry and I went out to eat with Todd and Ashley a couple of weeks ago. They made a comment about feeling so welcomed here. And Ashley made the comment that she was hugged maybe 6 or 7 times while she was here. She said that was more than she'd ever been hugged at her previous places ever in all the years that they'd been there. And way to go, SEC. That's exactly what people ought to be feeling in this place. And that's characteristic of you. And that's really, really great. Way to go. You know, there's some features about love that I think are important for us. And today, as we look in this one passage, we're going to be looking at Luke chapter 10, beginning at verse 25. Now, I want you to turn to that, if you would, please. Luke 10, 25 and following, because in that, we are going to see a story that Jesus tells, but it started off with a conversation he has with somebody. Now, if you're looking in one of our Bibles here, it's page 1612. If you're using one of our black Bibles in the chair in front of you, page 1612. And we're talking about a parable in this that starts with a conversation with a man who knows the law of God. Now listen to what it says here as it begins. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. It's like he had this PhD, you know. He really knew the Old Testament law. First 5 books of the Bible were something he would probably know backwards and forwards, and so he would certainly know about love. Now it says he did this, and he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? He was just kind of setting Jesus up, going to find out what it was that Jesus said about how to receive eternal life. And then Jesus asked him a question. He knows he's an expert of the law. He says, what is written in the law? You're an expert. You ought to know what it says. And so he replies, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then Jesus says to him, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. Now, you would think that could be the end of the conversation. However, this guy, in wanting to look good in front of his friends, wanting to justify himself, wanting to pat himself on the back for being able to maybe show up Jesus or to surprise Jesus by his question, says, and who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? Now, obviously, he had not been watching Mr. Rogers on television at this point to know the answer to that, okay? And so when Jesus begins to talk with him, Jesus gives him this wonderful reply. He doesn't give him a theological lecture. He tells him a story. Isn't that great about what Jesus does? Jesus is so good at telling stories. Have you noticed that we lean forward when we start to hear a story, don't we? We sit back when we're listening to a lecture, but when somebody tells a story, we lean into that. And I have a feeling that as Jesus begins to tell this story, that those who are listening, and especially this man who's been asking the question, is now engaged. He wants to know what Jesus is going to say. And as soon as he begins this story, there was a man going down the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. Okay? Immediately, everyone in his mind is saying, I've been on that road before. I know where that is. If I were to mention something today about a place that you have been, chances are you will lean forward. You'll say, I've been there. I know what you're talking about. I know that place. I experienced something like that there. But as he begins to tell the story, he puts a twist on it. He begins to talk about a man who was going from Jerusalem to Jericho, 17-mile stretch of road, but a very dangerous 17-mile stretch of road. And as he is telling this story, we find that Jesus says something that happens to this guy, obviously because of the danger there. He says, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They're all going to know this because it happened regularly. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now, obviously, Jesus has their attention. They're feeling some sort of emotion for this guy. They're waiting to find out what is coming next right here. And so Jesus is going to begin to tell them about this. Now, if you're following along and you're looking on the back of your bulletin today, you see there's an outline there. I want to give you the first word for your outline because it goes right along with this particular point. And that is, love is saying yes to God. Love says yes to God. As we're going along through this, we find that this man is going down that road, and there's a man that comes along and sees him there. Jesus says this is a priest that sees him. Isn't that interesting? A priest is a religious man. A priest is somebody who has the special position of kind of being a go-between between God and mankind. And so a priest had a lot of responsibilities. He was respected in the community. He was somebody who would not only know the law of God, but he would also be somebody who was supposed to act on the law of God as well. But he comes along here, and he's going down this same road, and as he is going down here, he sees this guy, and he has a decision he has to make. Am I going to stop and help this guy? Am I going to potentially defile myself from being able to be serving in the temple or not? Am I going to touch a body that the guy might die while I'm holding on to him, and then I'm really going to have to go through an expensive ceremonial cleansing? Or can I just kind of use him later as a sermon illustration and just kind of keep on going right here? And so the guy says, okay, I'm going to keep on going. I'll use him later in a sermon illustration. He walks on by, makes a wide berth around him, doesn't want to get contaminated, doesn't want to get his hands dirty in that regard. So the man is still lying there, and then along comes a Levite. Now, if a priest is sort of like the pastor of the temple, then the Levite is sort of like the assistant pastor of the temple. He's somebody who is active in the services. He has responsibilities. Maybe he is going down to make a presentation in Jerusalem. And while he's there, maybe he's going to tell a story. Maybe he'll even use this guy as an illustration. Maybe he's going to write it down on a 3x5 card and kind of keep it with himself right here so he's able to use it later on. But as he sees this guy, he too goes around him. Doesn't want to risk getting involved, maybe potentially defiling himself. Now, as Jesus is telling this story, certainly these guys are thinking, no, I can sort of identify with that. I wouldn't want to get my hands dirty or bloody either. I understand. I wouldn't want to have to get defiled and have to go through that process again. So they're all kind of identifying with these guys in a way. And then Jesus puts a twist in the story. Isn't that funny how if you're in a movie or someone's telling you a story, when suddenly there's an angle that you didn't anticipate that comes into the story, it's like, wow, I did not see that coming. And so Jesus tells about one more guy who comes along, and they did not see this coming. It was a Samaritan who was walking down this same road. Now, you have to understand why they would not have considered this to be a part of the story what Jesus was going to be telling. They would have never thought that Jesus would insert a Samaritan into the picture, because the Jews and the Samaritans did not get along with each other at all. I mean, there was a lot of racial tension between them. There was a lot of stress between them, religious tension between them, historical tension. So there are a lot of factors that went into the differences between Jews and Samaritans. They just did not get along. And then comes along the Samaritan, and as Jesus is telling the story, these guys are probably thinking, okay, the Samaritan's probably going to kill the guy out on the road. He's probably going to just say, I'm glad you're dying, and as he yells at him as he walks by. But instead, Jesus said he took pity on him. Isn't that something? Jesus said he took pity on him. Now that's important for us to understand, because the Samaritan had a heart. You know, to the Jews, the Samaritans wouldn't have had any kind of attachment like that, wouldn't have had any kind of compassion, any kind of emotion involved in that. And yet Jesus paints this Samaritan in a very favorable light, which would have set them back on their heels to hear this. And here we find that this man gets off of his donkey, okay? And he goes over to this guy. He pours some oil and wine on him to kind of act as a cleanser for his wounds that he's received after the beating and being stripped out there and lying in the road. He's trying to dress these wounds. And after he is able to take care of him as best as he can, getting blood on his hands, I'm sure, getting dirt underneath his fingernails, he then loads him up on his own donkey. Okay, his personal donkey, the man who was a Samaritan, and he puts that man on there, and together they go down to the nearest inn. Now, we're not told how far away that was, but I can tell you this, that this man was riding on that road. Now he is walking on that road. And this man who was so beaten up is the one who is now riding on, or even maybe laying across this donkey as they're going along. The Samaritan is having to expend some money as well. And let me tell you why. He's expending money because he goes to the inn and he is telling the innkeeper, get us a room, and he spends the night with this guy, taking care of his wounds during the night. And the next day, here's 2 coins, 2 denarii. And maybe if you were here a few weeks ago, you might remember that we showed what a denarius looks like up on the screens, so that you would have an understanding of that, because we're talking about Jesus and the paying of taxes and all that. They were trying to trip Jesus up another time. So you probably remember that it had a picture of an emperor on one side, and on the back side it talked about that person being the Son of God. So we find that he gives 2 denarii, which are worth about a day's wages each, to the innkeeper, and says, here, this will take care of his needs for now. I'll be back some other time. If he accumulates more need and you have more need for his staying here, then I will settle up with you when I get back. Here's a guy who has said yes to God. He has seen the need in somebody, and it doesn't matter if that person is like him or not. He is willing to say, I want to meet this person's needs. And that barrier is broken down. And so Jesus asked the question, which of these 3 was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? I think it's interesting that when this man answers the question, he is not even willing to say the word Samaritan. You might notice that in this. He says, I guess the one who showed mercy. Yes, I guess the Samaritan who showed mercy. I guess the one who showed mercy. He's revealing this deep-seated prejudice which is inside him. And then Jesus gives him an answer. He says, you go and do likewise. Isn't that something? You find the need in somebody else, and you begin to meet that need. Now, notice this is a great story, but there's more to the story. It's also a lesson that Jesus is giving, a lesson that can be applied to this man's situation and also acted on. And in a sense, the same thing is true for us. We probably are not going to see somebody bloodied along the road as we're going to work tomorrow, but we might. But chances are we're going to see somebody this week who has a need that we can begin to think, how can God use me to begin to meet that need? It might be something that will be difficult, but I need to do that. You see, the key in this story that Jesus is giving is love. This man was willing to love another person enough to get involved. Paul wrote in Romans 13, he who loves his fellow man has fulfilled the law. It's something that anybody can do. You don't have to have a degree from a college to do it. You don't have to be somebody who has tons of money to do it. It doesn't matter what you or they look like. It doesn't matter what you or they have gone through. We can all please God because we can all love him and love other people as well. When you love your neighbor, it could be the neighbor down the street or across the road from you. It could be someone in your neighborhood, but it doesn't have to be. It could be your neighbor at work tomorrow. Maybe they have a desk which is just around the corner from yours, and maybe they have some sort of a difficult time they're going through. That is your neighbor at that point, someone who has a need. It might be the person in the checkout line in front of you who has a need as well. Maybe there's a problem that they're experiencing, and you are able to say, let me help you with that. It could be someone on the closest machine to you at the gym, or your neighbor who sits behind you in math class. Whatever it might be, someone that you are going to encounter is someday going to have a need, and God will have put you in their proximity for a reason. That person has a need for the love of Christ being displayed through you. And so when you find that, when you respond, you are saying yes to God. You're saying, yes, Jesus, I believe your command to me is I'm supposed to love other people. So I am not going to refuse to do that. I'm going to say, yes, I will serve you by serving them. Yes, I will honor you by honoring them. Yes, I will get involved. So if you want to love God with your whole heart, just say yes, because love is an action, isn't it? Love isn't just something we say. Love is something that we do. Let me give you a couple of action ideas for this week. I would like for you to kind of prime the pump a little bit for yourself by thinking about what people are going to do for you this week. Now, none of us knows what this week holds for us, do we? But at the same time, my guess is that you will probably encounter someone who will do something for you. For example, maybe tomorrow morning you're going to go to work, and so you're getting out of your driveway and you're going down the road, and you're going to go to a major road like Bee Ridge or Clark or something like that, and you're just waiting there, okay? Traffic is heavy, up around University Parkway. You know what that's like up there, how busy it is up there. Let's just say you've been waiting for a while, and then suddenly you see this car coming, and you see through the windshield a hand going like this. Go on, I'm going to let you out. They're slowing up. They're providing a gap for you to be able to pull out in there. You wave to them, of course, and think, thank you so much for letting me in. That's one thing that a person can do to show you love this week. So you write that down. You remember what they did for you. Maybe there's something else. For example, maybe you get to work and you have someone who is a coworker of yours and say, man, I'm so glad you're here. Hey, I'm going to have a cup of coffee. Let me get one for you too. Small thing, isn't it? But that too is showing concern, isn't it? That's an act of kindness that someone's doing for you. So write that down, okay? Act of kindness for me. Maybe you are a student and you are sitting in the cafeteria at school by yourself and you're lonely, and someone from another table comes over and says, hey, can I sit with you? Or why don't you come sit with us? That's an act of kindness, isn't it? That's an observation, says that person has a need. And so you write that down also and begin to see things that maybe you can do also. Maybe you come home one day and your neighbor has been out and is on the day that you put your garbage out, and so your trash cans are out along the road when you left, and when you got back, they're up around your door, okay, of your garage. Someone came along and said, I'm going to help you out, and I'm going to bring in your trash cans for you. That is an act of love. You write these things down, and what begins to happen is you begin to be observant as to the needs around you. And you begin to say, I know how that made me feel. Maybe I can then help other people feel good as well. This Samaritan is responding because he felt this inner prompting. It was the right thing to do. And God will give us inner promptings, and when we act on them, we are saying yes to him. Now, there's another thing that love does, and love breaks down barriers. Love breaks down barriers. The question is, who is my neighbor that this guy asked? Just who is my neighbor? He's trying to justify himself, He probably in his mind already figured out who the neighbor was, but in reality, it wasn't who he anticipated when the story started. But if you and I were to go along and to, let's say that we're reporters for the Jerusalem Journal, okay? And we're going to go out there on that Jerusalem road. It goes down to Jericho, and we've been hearing about these attacks that are taking place out there. And so we're going to take our microphone out there, just like this one up here on the stage, and we're going to take that out there, and we're going to just interview people. And we find this guy laying there in the road, beaten up, bloodied, and we walk up to him and say, excuse me, sir, who do you think would be a good neighbor to you? My guess is that he would probably say, anybody who comes along and helps me. Anybody who comes along and helps me. That would be the person who would be the good neighbor to him. And I tell you what, it's true for us as well. Let me tell you why it's true for us. Let's say that you're driving your car out on 75, and all of a sudden you start hearing this knocking sound in it. And you start seeing this steam coming up from underneath the hood, and you say, uh-oh, something's going on here. Maybe you broke a belt, or maybe your water pump has gone out, and so you're having problems. So your engine is overheating a little bit, so you're pulling over, and you're saying, uh-oh, what am I doing now? What am I going to do? Let's say that someone comes along that looks totally different from you, somebody you wouldn't even count on, but that person who comes up to help, who has the skills that you don't have, that person has suddenly become your neighbor, hasn't they? They saw the need, they got involved. And that's what this Samaritan has done. That's what God may be calling you to do. Look for the needs of people and begin to meet those needs. And it will break down barriers along the way as well. You won't care so much about what a person looks like, how young they are, how old they are, no matter what it is. You won't care because they are helping you. And it shouldn't matter to us so much either. It's one of the blessings of the early church that I think is so fantastic. When you look at the church down through the centuries, it's been the same way. I like what Paul wrote, because he talked about how the church was filled with people who were both Jews and Gentiles. Isn't that neat? Because Jews and Gentiles are just like Jews and Samaritans. In a way, they didn't get along all that well. But here they are in the same church worshiping together. And there were men and there were women in the same church who were looked at as being equals in the Lord together too. That was not a common thing in that day either, for that matter. And there were slaves and masters in the seats near each other also, something that you just wouldn't anticipate. But why was that? It's because the love of Christ had brought them together. And today we find people from all different backgrounds and cultures and nations that worship together in the same room. Isn't that awesome that that's the case? Because they have a human experience together. And this guy who was there, who is seeing this man out on the road, he has a human experience. He's not looking at that man as a Jewish man. He is just looking at him as a human being who has a need. And he's going to express love. He sees that. You know, when our mission team went to Peru a couple of months ago, we were down there, and one of the things that we'd been told before we went was it's in a region that was kind of, had a river that was a tributary to the Amazon River. And we knew that there was a mountainous region there in Peru, and on the Pacific side, it was kind of different than it was in the area that we were going to. We were going to a place that was a bit more river basin and maybe even a bit jungly. And so when we went in there, we went with all this gear that was supposed to help us, or all this stuff supposed to help us to ward off mosquitoes. We had yellow fever shots before we left. We got malaria medicine, which will make you sick sometimes. We got that before we went down there too. And another thing that Sherry and I did is we got these wipes that you put on your hands or around your neck to keep mosquitoes away. Okay, we thought, bug repellent, smart way to go. So we got that too. And so one evening we were there, at probably a Monday or Tuesday night, and Sherry had come up to me and said, you better put this on. And so I went ahead and put that stuff on my hands and around my neck. And as soon as I did that, I'm walking through the church building, and a bug just goes, boom, right into my right eye, just out of nowhere. I didn't see it. It just saw a big target on my eye and said, okay, I'm going for that right there. And immediately, I mean, I was in pain. You know how it is when you get something like that in your eye. It really hurt. And so I'm thinking, how am I going to get this out of there? Because on the packaging, on this bug repellent, it has DEET in it. It says, do not get this in your eyes. I'm thinking, I can't rub my eyes. I can't do it. I got a contact in this eye. What am I going to do? And so, you know, I'm kind of walking around trying to figure this out. I'm trying to rub my eye with my sleeve on my shirt. And then I realized there's a bathroom outside the church building. So I go out there. They got a little running water there, but they have no soap and they have no towel, okay? So I try to get my hands wet, and I'm trying to wipe my hands on my pants like this, and then trying to get whatever that is out of my eye, and I couldn't do it. I tell you, that whole evening, I was blinking, and my eye is just watery and just feels bad. That night when we got back to the place we were staying, I looked in the mirror, and I tell you what, my eye was just as red as Ben's shirt back there on the inside. Well, and if you're wearing red today, your shirt too, okay? It was just really red on the inside there. And I'm looking, how am I going to get past this? You know, have I scratched my eye? What have I done? I got DEET in my eye. That's not a good thing. And I also realized that bug was still in there because it was up above my eyelid. So I had to mess with that, trying to get that out also. It was a little bitty beetle, just a little tiny thing, just flying through the air, I guess, and got in there like that. Let me tell you what that did for me the rest of the week. I had to wear my glasses almost the rest of the week. My eye was still red the rest of the week. And when I looked through that eye, if I closed my left eye, people were kind of distorted looking. And I was a little concerned that when I got back that maybe I might have to go to the eye doctor and kind of get that looked at. I just wondered if I had maybe done some permanent damage to my vision in that regard by getting that deed in there. Thankfully, that wasn't the case, but still, it kind of worried me. Still made me think about that. And that distorted view, that's not a good thing to have either. And sometimes we can have a distorted view of other people, can't we? We can miss what they really need. We can miss who they really are if we see them through a lens of either prejudice or maybe wanting to do our own thing and not necessarily help other people. When Jesus was on the earth, he saw people clearly. He didn't look at them with a certain agenda. He didn't look the other way. They weren't invisible to him. He didn't ignore them. He wasn't too busy for them. He didn't look at them as second-class citizens. He didn't see lost people or lost causes. He just saw people. Isn't that great to know? And what an important example that is to us. When Jesus was going through one town one day with his disciples, big crowds all around on both sides of the street, and they're cheering him on basically. It's like a parade almost. But there's this one guy, a little short guy, his name is Zacchaeus, and he wants to see Jesus. He can't see through the crowd, so he goes to the sycamore tree, which is a little further up the road, climbs that sycamore tree, and gets out over the road and begins to just wait and watch as Jesus is coming by. Little did Zacchaeus ever dream that Jesus would stop underneath that tree, look up, and say, Zacchaeus, because he'd never met Zacchaeus before. He says his name, Zacchaeus, you come down. I'm going to your house today. Zacchaeus got out of the tree, and Jesus went to his house. They had lunch together, and Zacchaeus' life began to change after that. Jesus could have very easily said, this guy's a tax collector. He's a problematic individual. No one in the town likes him. I'll just keep on pretending I never even saw him. Just walk on by. But instead, he knew there was a need in Zacchaeus' life that he could meet. He saw a man lying by the pool of Bethesda who was crippled, who'd been out there every day for 38 years. It's a long time. 1981 to 2019, that's 38 years, okay? That's how long, okay, this guy had been lying there. No one had put him into the pool so he could supposedly get healed through the process that everyone thought would happen if an angel came down and stirred the water, more of a superstition than anything else. But Jesus saw him and said, do you want to get well? And the man said, yes. He said, okay, take up your bed and walk. The man trusted Jesus, stood up, picked up his bed, and walked away. Jesus saw a need of a man who had been in that condition for 38 years, a tough time. He met that guy's need. He saw this woman one time. Actually, she saw him first. She came up, she snuck through the crowd, touched the hem of his garment, and went back into the crowd. The reason she did that is because she'd had this flow of blood for 12 years. She had a menstrual issue. It just wasn't stopping for her. And she thought, maybe if I can just touch the hem of his garment, maybe that will change my condition. And as soon as she touches that and begins to walk away, she's instantly healed. But Jesus stops and says, who touched me? And the disciples are saying, well, there's a crowd around you right now. What do you mean, who touched you? We're all bumping into you and everything else. But Jesus said, no, someone touched me. I felt power come out from me. And so he looked around, and there was that woman standing there. Must have been very sheepish looking, probably surprised that she'd been found out. But Jesus called her a daughter and said, your faith has made you well. He met her need. He knew that she needed help, and he met that need. He was not closed off to people who had needs. The four Gospels are full of accounts of Jesus breaking down cultural and religious barriers because of his love for people, and he changed their lives. And when we express love to other people, let's not look at what that person looks like so much as looking just for a person's heart, making sure that we don't look past the ones that aren't like us. Number 3, love is sometimes costly and inconvenient. Sometimes costly and inconvenient. Gary Chapman tells a story about a woman. Her name was Ruby Jones. Ruby is from New Orleans. She was a 67-year-old nurse that was there working in a place called the Lindy Boggs Medical Center. And she was there with 8 dying patients during Hurricane Katrina. She went into this place on a Sunday, and she stayed with them every day, not going home until Thursday. She was meeting their needs. And as the storm broke windows and blew open doors, she told her patients these words. She said, "We are here with you. We aren't going to leave." And when the medical center lost power and drinking water and began flooding, she continued to bathe and feed her patients and to dress their wounds. And when she left on Thursday, after the patients had been evacuated out of there, she was hungry, she was thirsty, but she had kept her promise to stay with those patients until the end. And during those most harrowing moments, her love for her patients sustained her and them. It wasn't convenient for her to be there. She could have very easily gone home, could have actually driven away from New Orleans and gotten away from all of that mess that Katrina brought. And at the same time, she stayed. It was inconvenient, but she stayed because she felt love and wanted to express that. When we see the needs of somebody else, we have to take the step from seeing their need to responding to really make love happen. When we continue to look at the story of the Good Samaritan, we find that Jesus said that once the Samaritan bandaged him up, he put him on that donkey, he walked alongside him. I would say that was pretty inconvenient, wouldn't you, to have to do that? Maybe he had been carrying stuff on the donkey. Now he's maybe having to carry some of that stuff himself before he gets to the end. He is willing to inconvenience himself. Maybe that man was inconvenient to him for his time. Maybe he had a responsibility somewhere. Maybe he was going to make money somewhere. Wherever it was, whatever it was, he had his priorities straight. He acted out of compassion. He knew that people were more important than stuff. Isn't that something that sometimes people in our country need to remember? That people are more important than stuff? Whenever I preach a funeral or a memorial service, one of the things I try to remind people is that time goes by so quickly. You ever met people who say, "I can't wait till the weekend," but they miss the days in between the weekends. They just kind of breeze through those to get somewhere else. And I talk about how important time is, that James in the Bible says that life is like a mist. And what he meant by like a mist is it's here for a little bit and then it's gone quickly. I think that most of us can look back at things that happened 10 years ago and it felt more like it happened about 4 or 5 years ago. That's just the way it is. Birthdays come around every 3 months now instead of every 12 months. It's just the way it seems sometimes. And another thing I try to stress to people is that people matter more than stuff does. I try to say that you need to spend time with people in your life, whether it's your family, whether it's your friends, whether it's your coworkers, whoever it might be. You need to look at people as being more important than the things you have. And that's the way this guy was doing. That man was more important to him than his stuff, more important to him than his own convenience, more important to him than anything else at that moment. He met that guy's need. There's a last thing. Love changes lives. Love changes lives. Jesus came talking about changing lives. And when he told the story about the Good Samaritan, he wasn't just giving the story, but instead he was giving the story to remind his hearers, that those that read it, that they need to do loving acts of kindness so that they can change the lives of other people. The priest and the Levite, in most cases, would be viewed as the heroes of almost any story of that day that would be told. But instead, it's the Samaritan who is the hero. And he was willing to change that man's life. Now, we don't know for sure what happened to this guy after this. Obviously, it's a parable. It's a story that Jesus is telling. So we don't know the rest of the story about what could have happened to the Samaritan man, or to the man that was beaten up, But let me tell you, I think what we could at least use our sanctified imaginations on and go into would be that this man probably had a change of heart about Samaritans after that. He probably thought to himself, I didn't like Samaritans before that, but that Samaritan came along and saved me. That Samaritan came along and invested in me. That Samaritan came along and came back and paid my bills for me. That Samaritan gave of himself for me. Maybe all Samaritans aren't like I thought they were. Maybe when he got together with family members at family get-togethers, and that story was told, maybe they said, maybe all Samaritans aren't like we thought they were. Maybe they're humans just like us. Maybe we can help meet their needs as well. And maybe it's something that maybe that guy think to himself, maybe I need to have my eyes opened so I can help other people in needs as well. And what about those who were listening to Jesus' story? I'm sure they didn't expect the Samaritan to be the hero there. But what Jesus really is making a point is that your neighbor is anybody who has a need. It doesn't matter if they're right next to you or 5 miles away. Your neighbor is anybody who has a need. And whenever Jesus shared the gospel, he said about changing lives, showing compassion to those who hadn't had much compassion from other people at times. They became Jesus' neighbor in that. Little children, a couple of times in Scripture, came to Jesus that we read about, and the disciples thought, oh, Jesus is too busy to have little kids around him. You're interrupting what Jesus is doing. Come on, shoo, get out of here, little kids. Go back to the area you're supposed to be in. But instead, Jesus says, no, let the little children come unto me. He said the kingdom of God is just like those little kids. He gave them a value in the eyes of the disciples that maybe they had not seen before. He also was willing to help out those who would be considered to be the social outcasts of the day, like those tax collectors who were ripping people off. They were taking taxes for the Romans, but they were also skimming money off the top for themselves as well. That's what Zacchaeus had done. That's also what Matthew had done. Yet Matthew, in receiving the love of Christ and the acceptance of Christ, had a changed life. He became a disciple. He followed Jesus all the way through his ministry and eventually wrote the book of Matthew that we have in our Bibles. Jesus showed love to those who were diseased with leprosy. Everyone else was supposed to stay away from them. Whenever a leper went somewhere, there were other people who said, unclean. They had to shout out, unclean, so that people would know they were there and wouldn't get close to them. But Jesus was willing to touch those kinds of people. Demon-possessed people who scared others with their behavior, Jesus restored those people, cast the demons out. The prostitutes had led very sad lives. They received a lot of attention, but not respect or love, and Jesus gave them respect and love and hope as well. They were poor. Scripture tells that Jesus had compassion on the poor. I like it what columnist Cal Thomas said one time. He said, love talked about is easily ignored, but love demonstrated is irresistible. Isn't that true? If we just talk about love, then we can ignore that. Other people could ignore that. But if we actually demonstrate love, it is irresistible. It should always be irresistible. It ought to be in our tool belt all the time as believers in Christ. It ought to be something that we wear all the time, something that we are known for is by loving other people. There was a big boundary one time separating a guy named James Kennedy from his dream. And that dream, or that boundary, was the fence surrounding the football field at T.L. Hanna High School in Anderson, South Carolina. One day in 1963, a long time ago, Hanna head football coach Harold Jones invited 17-year-old James to stick around and to help out with a football practice. Now, you might think, well, that's interesting, but what's the rest of the story? What's the point here of this? Well, what made Coach Jones' invitation even more remarkable is that James, whose nickname was Radio, was mentally disabled. Maybe you've seen a movie called Radio. He always carried a radio around with him, and that's how he got his nickname. But Coach Jones saw radio as someone to be included, not excluded, and it changed radio's life forever. T.L. Hanna High School became the second home for radio. And not only did he become a valuable member of the football and basketball teams, he also became an important part of the T.L. Hanna High School community. When he was interviewed, radio said, "People love me. Everybody loves me." Here was the guy on the outside of the fence, looking in, not feeling like he was accepted, suddenly received acceptance from this man, this coach, and his life was changed. You and I can change some lives, can't we? Look for the person who is down and out. Look for the person who needs our help. When the Apostle Paul wrote to the churches in Galatia, he said, let us not get tired of doing what is good. At just the right time, we'll reap a harvest of blessing if we don't give up. Therefore, whenever we have the opportunity, we should do good to everyone. He also wrote, let no debt remain outstanding except for the continuing debt to love one another. For he who loves his fellow man has fulfilled the law. You know, it's interesting that when we begin to change someone else's life, we might find that our own life is changed in the process of that. The life we change the most might be our own life. If we begin to say yes to God, we begin to recognize that even if I'm inconvenienced, I'll make a difference in this regard. We might even notice that we can do things that will make a lifetime difference in some people's lives. What are some practical ways that you and I can share? Let me just give you a few things that are things we can do right now. One of those is that Hurricane Dorian came through recently, devastated the Bahamas, and has hit also along our coast a bit and up now even all the way to Canada, they say. A lot of people along the way are going through tough times. We can help. And we have a couple in our church, Mike and Cindy Gordon, who are right over here. Guys, will you just wave your hands just for a second? Mike and Cindy right over here, who are volunteers for Agape Flights in Venice. Every week, they help load supplies that go into the Caribbean to get those supplies to missionaries in a variety of different countries that are there. They faithfully do that work. Well, right now, Agape Flights is sending things over almost every day to the Bahamas to meet needs that are over there. You and I can help meet needs. There's a basket out in front of that column in the foyer area, and they're looking for things like peanut butter and the crackers that have like peanut butter and cheese in them, and wipes that will get rid of bacteria, and tuna pouches, not the cans, but the pouches that you can use at school. They're looking for things like that they can take down there. And so on Tuesday or by Tuesday of this week, if you could bring some of those supplies by here, that'd be great, because they're going to come pick them up, take them down to Venice, and get them loaded up on an airplane to take over there to the Bahamas. That is an act that we can do. The Bahamas people are just like that guy beaten up in the road. They are people who have been devastated by this. They've lost a lot. They need our help. So can you help them this week? Will you help them this week? Bring some things in to make a difference for them. Todd and Ashley Allen. You know, Todd's the guy we're going to vote on a little while ago. Todd's the guy that will probably take my place. I hope he does. You know, but they're going to be moving down here eventually. They're going to need some hands and feet to help them move into the place that they're going to buy. They're going to need to get their furniture unloaded and placed in the rooms where it goes. They're going to need to eat. Maybe you can buy a pizza and take it over there for them as all this is being done. Maybe you can get them a gas card or a gift card for a grocery store or movie tickets or whatever it might be. Maybe you can shower them in some way or another, even with cash, ways that can help them as they get acclimated to being here in Sarasota, because Sarasota's a lot different than Indianapolis, okay? And they're going to need an opportunity to have our help along the way. You know, in our first service, we have a guy named Tom Gallione. Tom is a member of the life group of ours at Sherry and I do. And Tom is looking for Bibles to be brought in. And chances are you have several Bibles at home. You probably have one or two that are your favorites, but you have others that you don't really use. Can you bring one or two in here next week and make sure that they are ready for Tom? Because Tom is starting a Bible study at the Manatee County Detention Center, and he wants to take those up there as an act of love for the prisoners, so he can introduce them to the one who can really set them free, okay? And so if you can bring a Bible or two in next week, wouldn't that be great to do that? That's showing love for people who can't do much for themselves. We have a guy in our church, his name is Ray Gordon. Ray is the one who heads up our missions team. He's a missionary himself, has a mission to Muslims over in the Middle East. Great guy. His wife, Gail, this week was climbing on a ladder and fell off and broke her left leg from the knee on down. Both the bones that are in there, both of them broken. And she is in the hospital having surgery tomorrow morning. Now, I tell you this because you can pray for her, but also Ray doesn't drive anymore. He's going to need a ride sometimes back and forth to the hospital after this week. He's got a daughter coming in today from another state. But once she leaves, he's going to need some transportation. He may even need a meal or two. And Gail will be going to a rehab center sometime after this. Maybe he'll need a ride to that place. Maybe you can say to our office, I will help, okay? And we can get you hooked up with them. Why not come to a Celebrate Recovery meeting on Sunday nights here at the church, where there are people who are coming in and say, I just need somebody to love me. I need someone to come alongside me and care about me. I've been going through a rough time, and they just need somebody to come in and say, I'm here for you. You know, let's eat together. Let's talk together. Let me be there for you, to pray for you. We need to love families enough to say to Amy, who is our children's pastor, and Brandon, who is our student pastor, that I want to get involved. I want to help out as a youth leader or a children's leader as well. I want to do that. I feel like God is drawing me into that position. You tell them that. We have a homeless ministry here at the church, and our homeless friends will need transportation every week back and forth from where they pick up and then taking them back. Now, I'm not asking you to do it every week, but if you could do it once or twice a month, if you could drive the church van and go pick them up and then take them back after the services are done, or you could help prepare a meal for them on a Sunday because we feed them every Sunday, if you could be involved in that, wouldn't that be an act of love? Wouldn't that be saying, I see your need, I can help meet that need? Sometimes we don't meet needs because we just don't know about them. I've just shared a few with you right now that you know about now. We're all kind of in this boat together. We can all help out in some way or another. And we can be like Jesus when we do that. You know, Jesus lives in your neighborhood. Say, he does. I didn't know that. Yep, Jesus lives in your neighborhood. You might encounter Jesus as that young latchkey kid who comes home every day to an empty house. His mom and dad are both at work, or he's got a single parent, and he's not got anybody there with him at that point. He needs someone to tutor him or to throw a ball with him every once in a while. Maybe you could throw a ball with Jesus to that little latchkey kid once or twice a week and help him or her out. Maybe you could be there for them. Maybe it's that elderly widow who is dying of loneliness. She has no one to talk to, yet you're serving Jesus by meeting her need. Jesus might be in that young couple who would give anything to have another couple come alongside them who has a healthy marriage and say, you know what, we know you're struggling right now, but you can make it through this. You'll be okay through this. It could very well be that maybe you can be Jesus to them or they're Jesus to you, because in Matthew 25, Jesus said, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did it for me. Isn't that neat? Isn't that neat? You know, today we've looked at this passage and seen some really significant things in it. I hope that it's helped you to maybe have a different set of eyes, so to speak, to have different lenses to look through and start seeing those needs of other people and say, how can I be involved? What kind of a difference can I make in that regard? How can I serve to make a difference? You know, Jesus expressed his love for us most powerfully through a selfless act by going to the cross to die for our sins there. And every week we offer an invitation time for anybody who would say, you know what, I would like to respond to that. I'd like to accept the free gift of salvation that he offers. And today is no different. We're going to have an invitation time. And if there's someone here who says, you know, I need to make Jesus Christ my Lord and my Savior, we offer this invitation for you to join me back in the back of the room. I'll be back over in the corner over there. You can come back and talk with me a bit, and I'll share with you about accepting Christ, about faith and repentance and confession of that faith, and even talking about being baptized as well.